So, have you ever sat down to play a board game with someone? Eh,
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Right, and about halfway through, you realize that the person who is currently winning also happens to be the one who gets to rewrite the rule book.
Wait, like every time it's your turn?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Like every single time. You make a move, and they just, change a technicality.
Oh, that is the worst.
Yeah.
That sounds incredibly frustrating.
It is. You score a point, they invalidate the round, and you just
Yeah.
sit there looking at the board wondering how on earth you're supposed to keep playing.
Because the actual mechanics of the game are basically weaponized against you.
Right. And that feeling, that specific feeling of structural entrapment is exactly what we are tearing apart in today's deep dive.
Yeah, we have a really heavy one today.
We do. We are exploring a profound, highly analytical, and frankly, pretty heavy strategic text. And it asks a very similar question about modern society.
What happens when a culture enters what the author calls a closed loop?
Exactly. A system where the very act of organizing for change feels, well, structurally impossible. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
Our source material today is a philosophical breakdown of state power, mass surveillance, and human resilience.
It's a really intense read.
It really is. And before we get into the mechanics of all this, I want to establish a firm baseline for the listener.
Oh, yeah, that's important to clarify right up front.
Because while this text deals extensively with the nature of the law and surveillance and elite political classes, our deep dive is entirely impartial.
Completely. We are leaving left-wing and right-wing political affiliations at the door today.
Right. Our mission is simply to examine the fascinating architecture of these power systems and just unpack the theories the author presents about how they operate.
We aren't taking sides, we're looking under the hood.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
for you listening, if you've ever felt overwhelmed by the sheer scale of modern surveillance or, the labyrinth of legal systems we live in, this deep dive maps out exactly how those systems operate.
And surprisingly, it exposes some massive structural vulnerabilities in them too.
Yeah, which is the really hopeful part. But, okay, let's start with the big concept. What exactly is a closed loop?
Right, so we are essentially looking under the hood of a highly complex machine to understand the physics of its engine, right?
Yeah, okay, I like that analogy.
The author theorizes that modern societies can slip into this closed loop. And it isn't like a sudden cinematic, military takeover.
It's not the movies.
No, not at all. It's a gradual accumulation of systemic advantages. And eventually, these advantages insulate a ruling class from any meaningful challenge.
So they just build a moat around themselves, slowly over time.
Exactly. And the mechanism relies heavily on an asymmetry of information and force. So the state acquires an overwhelming tactical advantage through mass surveillance networks.
Which are basically everywhere now.
Right, and they fuse those networks with militarized policing. So they have a real-time map of the board, going back to your game analogy.
And the physical capacity to just strike anywhere on it. But, surveillance and force alone, they don't really create a closed loop on their own, right? I mean, dictatorships historically have had those things, and they still face revolutions.
That's a great point. You need something else to hold it together.
Right. There has to be a mechanism that paralyzes people before they even think about pushing back. And the text points to hyperdense law as the real binding agent here.
The sheer volume of laws.
Yes. Like, we live in an environment where legal codes are so incredibly layered and complex that total compliance is, well, it's just a mathematical impossibility.
Yeah, you probably broke like 3 obscure financial or communication laws on your drive to work today.
Just by having a smartphone pinging cell towers in the background.
Exactly.
So if everyone...
So, when the legal code is so broad that almost any meaningful organizing, whether it's, I don't know, a financial startup or a grassroots protest,
Right. Any kind of group activity.
yeah, when that can be construed as a conspiracy or wire fraud or cybercrime, legality basically ceases to be a stable constraint.
You can't just follow the rules to stay safe.
Exactly. Citizens can no longer look at the rule book and say, okay, I am operating within the bounds of the law, therefore I am safe.
Because the rule book says you're already guilty of something.
Right. The system is functionally broadcasting a very different, very chilling message. You are free to act until we decide you are not.
Wow. You're free to act until we decide you're not. That creates a massive psychological choke point for people.
It forces people to police themselves. The ambiguity itself is the weapon.
Right, because you don't need a police officer on every single corner if the population is constantly second-guessing whether their private group chat is going to trigger a selective prosecution.
Exactly. It's
Um,
paralyzing.
but wait, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Go for it.
If literally everyone is technically breaking some obscure law just by existing or sending an email, isn't the state just paralyzed by its own bureaucracy? Like, how do they even function with that much red tape?
Well, that is actually a feature, not a bug.
Really? How so?
Because the people writing these hyperdense laws are the exact same people benefiting from the barriers to entry they create.
Ah, regulatory capture.
Yes, regulatory capture. But it isn't just lobbying. It's the ruling class writing incredibly complex compliance frameworks that only their massive corporate or political allies can afford to navigate.
So it filters out the competition, but under the guise of like public safety or consumer protection.
You nailed it. And what's fascinating here is how the author connects that regulatory capture to the psychology of the ruling class itself.
Right, the whole true believer concept.
Exactly. This system relies on a self-mythologizing elite. The people operating the levers of this closed loop, they do not view themselves as authoritarian villains.
They aren't sitting in a dark room twirling their mustaches.
No, they genuinely believe they are the good guys. They think they are the guardians of democracy, of order, and progress. They view their discretionary power as a necessary shield against chaos.
So because they are completely morally certain of their own righteousness, the system just lacks any internal brake mechanism.
Right. They never think they're going too far because they're doing it for the right reasons.
Wow. Okay, so if a system has this titanium-level concentration of power, I mean, they have the data panopticon, the militarized enforcement, the selectively enforced legal labyrinth, and the moral certainty that they are saving the world, it just sounds mathematically invincible.
It does sound like the board game is permanently rigged.
Totally rigged. But the text actually pivots here, right?
It does. It argues that this exact power creates massive exploitable vulnerabilities.
Okay, yes. Let's talk about the brittleness of this system, because if we connect this to the bigger picture of systems theory, that density of control is exactly what causes problems.
Right. The very force multipliers the state relies on to maintain the closed loop are what will eventually fracture it.
Like the mass data collection.
Exactly. Think about the mechanics of mass surveillance and predictive analytics. To surveil everything, you must log everything.
You have to build sprawling, permanent digital archives of every transaction, every communication, every physical movement.
Which means the state is constantly generating endless forensic data trails of its own activities, too.
Oh, that's a great point. If they selectively prosecute someone, the metadata proving that abuse of power is just sitting on a server somewhere.
Right. To catch every anomaly, they have to archive petabytes of data, which permanently logs their own fingerprints.
And managing petabytes of sensitive data, I mean, that requires an incredibly complex, sprawling infrastructure. You can't just automate all of it.
Not at all. This system demands the labor of thousands of mid-level workers.
Systems administrators, data analysts, network engineers.
Middle managers.
Yeah.
These individuals are essential to the daily operation of the surveillance state, but they are not members of the protected elite class.
Right. They aren't benefiting from the regulatory capture. They're literally just trying to pay their rent and buy groceries.
Exactly. And because they aren't ideologically pure, true believers, the state has a massive vulnerability sitting right in its own server rooms.
That structural reliance guarantees leaks. It guarantees whistleblowers.
It absolutely does. The author identifies this as the true believer problem. When a ruling class cannot recognize its own criminality, it loses the capacity for self-correction.
Because they're just completely isolated within their own ideological feedback loops.
Right. They begin to misread signals from the public. They mistake noise for signal.
They treat every minor challenge like, a localized protest or a new decentralized finance app or just a dissenting publication. They treat it as an existential threat to the entire social order.
Because to them, any loss of control is the end of the world.
So it's like a heavily armored knight.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, think of a knight who has bolted on so much thick, impenetrable steel that they literally can't turn their head to see out of the visor.
Right, they're blind to their surroundings.
And the armor is so incredibly heavy they can't even feel the ground they are walking on. They are completely insulated from reality. So a mosquito buzzes by and they swing a massive broadsword at it.
Causing huge collateral damage.
Exactly. And everyone watching suddenly realizes, how dangerous and unhinged the night actually is.
The system looks invincible right up until it doesn't. They trip over their own weight.
Yeah, they burn through their institutional legitimacy faster than they can manufacture it.
And that loss of legitimacy is the tipping point. The system is incredibly dangerous in the short term because, well, it has the physical force and the legal cover to act without hesitation.
But structurally, it is profoundly brittle.
Very. It cannot absorb shocks because it has destroyed the very feedback loops, like a free press or an independent judiciary that would normally warn it to course correct.
So if the state is this lumbering, flailing, heavily armored knight, how do everyday people actually organize and push back without just getting crushed?
Because you can't just do a frontal assault.
Right. Standing in front of the knight and loudly declaring your opposition is just going to get you targeted by a selective prosecution. But the desire to organize doesn't just evaporate when it's outlawed.
No, it just changes form.
Mm-hmm.
The text suggests that the organizing simply changes substrate.
Changes substrate. Let's dig into that.
Historically and structurally, when open, visible political coordination is criminalized, populations adapt. They shift how and where they communicate.
They abandon large, easily targeted mass movements.
Right, they fracture into smaller, highly dense, trust-based networks. Because while the state possesses the architecture to criminalize visible actions, it lacks the capacity to criminalize what people think.
Or what they notice.
Exactly, or the latent coordination that happens when people share the same mental models of reality.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. The text introduces this concept of social steganography.
Yes, such a crucial concept.
And for anyone who doesn't know, steganography in computer science is the practice of hiding a secret file inside an ordinary file.
Like hiding a text document inside an image file.
Right. But in a social context, it's the practice of embedding political or organizational meaning inside completely apolitical surfaces.
It's like hiding a secret map inside a totally ordinary landscape painting.
The authorities just see a pretty picture, but everyone in the know sees the escape route.
Exactly. And it's not just passive hiding. It's more like a biological Trojan horse interacting with a cell.
Okay, explain that.
So the authorities inspect the outside of the structure. Maybe it's an open source software club or a neighborhood community garden or even just a meme page on social media.
And it looks entirely benign.
Right. It passes a security check.
Right.
But internally, it's delivering a different payload.
And that payload is latent coordination.
Yes. By operating these seemingly mundane apolitical projects, people are building high-trust networks. They're establishing secure communication channels and pooling resources.
But they aren't explicitly stating, like, we are going to coordinate a strike or we are going to build a shadow economy.
Now, that would be illegal. That would get them crushed.
Right. But because they share the same model of reality and they've built trust through these everyday projects, when a crisis hits or an opportunity arises, they inherently know how to act in unison.
Without needing a vulnerable, centralized leader broadcasting orders.
It's like broadcasting on a frequency that the state's massive, expensive surveillance radios simply aren't tuned to receive.
The data is all there, sitting right in front of them, but it just looks like background static to the algorithm.
Which completely shifts the battlefield. Instead of fighting the state in the courts or at the ballot box where, let's face it, the state has already captured the regulatory framework.
Well, you can't win on their turf.
People use economic and technical leverage instead of overt political confrontation.
And shifting the domain of the conflict like that neutralizes the state's primary weapons. The author notes that this process is painfully slow, but from a systems perspective, it is virtually unstoppable.
Because, I mean, the state cannot selectively prosecute a community garden without looking utterly ridiculous.
Exactly. It just further bleeds their legitimacy.
Okay, so this sounds like a great theoretical workaround, but I always like to ask the so what question.
The practical application.
Yeah. What does this actually look like in practice for the individual listener trying to survive and build within this system? Because the text actually outlines specific nonviolent strategies for a high surveillance environment.
It does. And the first step it talks about isn't really about action at all. It's about perception.
Cognitive liberation.
Right. Cognitive liberation. Helping people clearly see the structure of the closed loop is the prerequisite for any strategic action.
Once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Exactly. Once an individual understands the mechanics of regulatory capture and rule by selection, that psychological choke point we talked about earlier just dissolves.
It neuters the propaganda.
Yes. The state relies heavily on manufactured consent, and the illusion that there's a fair rule book. Understanding that the system actually operates purely on discretionary power fundamentally neutralizes the anxiety of trying to perfectly comply.
You stop gaslighting yourself. You
Yeah.
realize the game is rigged, so you stop pouring your energy into trying to win by their impossible rules.
Which leads directly into the next strategy, resilience building.
And the text doesn't frame this as some glamorous cinematic rebellion. Yeah.
No, not at all. It frames it as simple, unromantic robustness.
Robustness, I like that word. It's about reducing dependency on captured institutions. If you can't rely on the state's fragile supply chains, you have to build parallel structures.
Right. Through mutual aid, local production, alternative income. If the state uses economic access as a weapon, like freezing bank accounts or revoking business licenses,
The logical countermeasure is to develop alternative, decentralized mechanisms for sustaining life and community.
exactly. This could involve establishing local agricultural networks or utilizing decentralized finance protocols.
Or even creating localized mesh communication networks that don't route through the major telecom providers.
Exactly. You reduce your surface area for attack.
And when local networks aren't enough, the text points to jurisdictional arbitrage.
Oh, this is a big one.
Yeah. Now, usually when we hear arbitrage, we think of finance, right? Buying a stock in one market and selling it in another to capture the price difference.
Right, but jurisdictional arbitrage in this context is much more mechanical.
It's about fluidly routing ideas, code, and capital around the state's geographic choke points.
Because the architecture of the internet allows for a separation of physical presence and digital infrastructure.
So if a specific state government enacts hyperdense laws that effectively criminalize, say, a new form of encryption or a decentralized financial tool,
The developers don't just stay and fight a losing legal battle in that state.
no, they simply migrate the legal entity, the servers, and the capital to a jurisdiction that hasn't captured that specific regulatory sector.
But the crucial part is that the technology still leaks back across the borders.
Right. The state might ban the infrastructure domestically, but the citizens just use a VPN to access the servers hosted in a friendlier jurisdiction.
The state loses the tax revenue, it loses the technological edge, and it still fails to control the population's access to the tool.
The closed loop slowly starves itself of innovation.
Which brings us to the final strategy, cultural and narrative work.
The macro application of social steganography.
Exactly. It utilizes fiction, satire, documentaries, art to shape the underlying operating system of society.
Shaping what society views as normal or intolerable.
Right, because you can't selectively prosecute a metaphor.
No, you can't. A perfectly executed piece of satire can delegitimize a rigid, self-mythologizing elite overnight.
It exposes the absurdity of the heavily armored knight to the entire crowd all at once.
But looking at all these strategies, cognitive liberation, resilience, arbitrage, narrative steganography, I have to point out the uncomfortable truth the author drops near the end of the text.
Yeah, it's a sobering reality check.
It really is. It sounds like the author is telling us to let go of the fantasy of a clean, cinematic victory. There is no decisive battle where the corrupt elites are marched out of the Capitol in handcuffs while everyone cheers.
No, there isn't. The author is highly pragmatic about the reality of a captured system. In an over-criminalized environment, there is simply no safe, fast, and legal way to fix it or dismantle the closed loop.
The cost of open, overt confrontation is just ruinously high.
Waving a flag that says, "I am your enemy," to a system that possesses mass surveillance and discretionary legal power is simply feeding yourself into the grinder.
It serves no strategic purpose. It just gives the state the forensic data it needs to crush you and justify its own existence to the public.
Exactly. The only viable path forward relies on slow, deniable, distributed ways to help people quietly reclaim their autonomy.
You don't blow up the rigged board game. You just quietly walk away from the table, sit down in the next room, and start building an entirely different game while the referee isn't looking.
It's about outgrowing the system until its control mechanisms are rendered obsolete. The true measure of robustness isn't how loudly you can oppose the armored knight. It's your capacity to reclaim your economic and social sovereignty without ever drawing the knight's attention in the first place.
Wow. Okay, let's pull all of these strategic layers together to understand the ultimate message here. We started with the terrifying premise of the closed loop, how mass surveillance and hyperdense, impossible-to-follow laws create a society governed entirely by selective prosecution and fear.
Rule by selection.
Right. And then we uncovered the inherent brittleness of that system, how the need to log everything creates massive data vulnerabilities and relies on a workforce that inevitably leaks the state's abuses.
The true believer problem.
Yes. And finally, we explored how human adaptation always finds a way to change substrate, using social steganography and latent coordination to build high-trust networks right under the authorities' noses.
Understanding these dynamics provides that crucial cognitive liberation. It's a sobering text, definitely, but ultimately it's an empowering realization that true robustness comes from building parallel networks, rather than just loudly confronting an armored system.
There is a massive lingering variable that this text touches on right at the very end, one that kind of changes the physics of this entire dynamic.
Yeah, the final provocation.
We talked about how the state's biggest vulnerability is its reliance on thousands of human workers, the IT admins, the data analysts who eventually blow the whistle because they have a conscience.
Right.
What happens when the system no longer needs them?
This raises a profoundly important question for the near future. As the closed loop begins to integrate advanced artificial intelligence to automate the analysis of all that surveillance data, the human element is systematically removed from the server room.
An AI does not experience a crisis of conscience.
No, it doesn't. An AI does not leak documents to the press because it is horrified by an abuse of power.
So when the heavily armored knight replaces its human nervous system with a synthetic one, the vulnerability of the mid-level worker completely evaporates.
Exactly.
If the closed loop can achieve total automation of its selective prosecution engine, does the window for jurisdictional arbitrage and social steganography close forever?
That's a terrifying thought.
I want you to sit with that. Look closely at the rapid deployment of automated systems in our own legal and financial networks right now. And look at the art, the memes, or the seemingly apolitical community gardens and tech projects around you. How much social steganography is already happening right under your nose, quietly rewriting the rules of the game? And as you quietly build your parallel structures, ask yourself, how much time is left on the clock before the system doesn't need humans to enforce the rules of the rigged game anymore?